to avoid the worst hell. And if you spent absolutely no time worried about a Buddhist idea of hell, which, depending on which Buddhist variety you're talking about, may not even exist, but there is this idea of neurons where you're retested throughout time and it's temporary. Which, by the way, is hell permanent? Is it temporary? I mean, are we just talking about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin at this point, because we don't have any reason to think that it's real in the first place? And as soon as people realize that they haven't given one moment's thought to the hell from some religion that they weren't indoctrinated into, that they don't ascribe to, all of a sudden the hell that they're currently worried about seems a little less impactful, seems a little less serious. The problem here is, in many cases, these notions about you being evil and born bad and undeserving, and you're doomed to hell until we can fix it. Teaching for this often begins very, very young, before you develop the skills of critical thinking, skeptical analysis, before you have the opportunity to explore reality, to even figure out, how do we figure out what's real? If I've heard a claim, how do I know whether or not it's correct? And we're teaching this, not we, some people are teaching this to kids before they are even capable of doing that. And that's why 50 years later, even after they've, in their daily life kind of wising up to, I don't have any good reason to believe this, they still are plagued with these fears and doubts. And that's normal. We're plagued with fears and doubts all the time. We push them off to the side generally because we need to focus on actually getting work done. And if we sat around mired in our fears and doubts all the time, we would get nothing done. And these are the fears that they're playing on, and these cause real pain and real anxiety to people all the time. Now, when I talk to believers, I understand, I was a fundamentalist for more than 25 years. From their perspective, your house is on fire. And they're coming out to tell you, your house is on fire, you need to come out, you are in danger, come out. They look at this as if they're rescued. I can't look at it that way anymore. From my point of view, their friend set my house on fire. And it's sent them to tell me to get out of that. Which, if it were real, would make them an ass. But what's worse is I walk outside and I look around, no fire. And I'm walking around my house and I go, see, it's an invisible fire. It's a fire that's going to happen soon. You could die tonight. Do you know where you could spend eternity? The fire's not happening right now. The fire's going to happen very soon. So let's talk about this for a second. There's a God, according to them, who has some set of rules, and he's going to punish you in some way or reward you in some way. The first question is any of this real? The second one is it moral? What is this idea of perhaps infinite punishment for finite crimes is, as far as I can tell, infinitely immoral? What could you possibly ever do? And by the way, they're also thinking about thought crimes. You sin in your mind, you sin against God just with your thoughts. That's hogwash. There's nothing that I can think that wounds another person, and certainly not some supernatural divine being. I can't possibly wound this God. And the very fact that he made me, according to their view, means that these failings are ones he built in. So what the Christian will say is, it is a case of your house being on fire, and the most moral thing we can do is tell you about it. And my view of that is, no, I don't see the fire. I appreciate your concern, but how do I know that it's real? And what you're telling me is that I think this is immoral, but I don't have a complete understanding of morality. But you have a friend who does have a complete understanding of morality, who created me and created the system and created the punishment that you're trying to save me from. Great. I don't think it's moral. Yes, but that's because you are flawed in your thinking. You are a fallen, limited being. You can't understand what God understands. Okay? Why didn't God make it so that we can at least understand his idea of justice and recognize that it is in fact just? That's God's fault if he exists, not ours. And the warning about the punishment, the warning alone is causing real anxiety and real pain in people. So I have a warning, which I think is immoral because it's causing harm. And the excuse they want to give is that I can't see the ultimate good that this harm does, which is also immoral if somebody was created without sufficient ability to understand how this is actually super probationally moral. This is the good thing. I mean, have kids. You don't even have to have kids. When you live in life and you make mistakes and you learn from your mistakes, when you get better and you have a better understanding of the world. When you look around the world and you see things that you object to, that you think are immoral, where people are being wronged and harmed, you begin to develop an understanding of this. How can you hold someone morally responsible for what they cannot understand? So if the claim is God understands it and you cannot, and maybe he'll explain it to you in heaven, assuming he doesn't annihilate you or stick you in the butt before it. How does that make it moral? If you can't make, it'd be like a software developer creating a game and then looking at the little people in his game and trying desperately to communicate with them and failing over and over again. That's his problem. He created something that he can't communicate with. It's a feature, not a bug. The very idea is that we're going to be punished for understanding his moral view. And that gets to a whole separate discussion of, is his moral view actually correct? Is the view that you're talking about, that you gleaned from your interpretation of Scripture, actually correct? Because I, for one, have never heard from a God. All I've heard from is God's representatives, or that's what they profess themselves as. And if they are also limited beings who aren't perfect, then why should I believe them? After all, the Bible says, let God be true and every man a liar. So every Christian has to be considered a liar. Every representative of every faith that buys into that sort of doctrine would have to be a liar. And so I'm sitting around waiting for God to actually talk to me and explain why and how this idea of hell could actually be moral. So we're in a position where there's no agreement on whether or not any of this is real. There's no agreement on what hell is or isn't. There's no agreement on what it's like to be in hell if there is such a place. Is it temporary? Is it permanent? How do you find your way out? How do you avoid it? Is there anything that you can do, or is this just some being playing favorites? No agreement. And yet, we're teaching this to people. We're doing real harm. We are making them feel that who they are fundamentally, whether it's about their sexuality or their thoughts or actions that are between consenting, reasonable adults that I can't find any possible objection to. I don't know why you're so obsessed with what goes on in people's bedrooms. All of these things are part of us, and they're all wrong. I don't buy into conspiracy theories. I don't look at religion as some intentional construction to control the masses, even though it does. I don't look at it as a top-down conspiracy. It seems to be, from my perspective, flaws in our thinking that became institutionalized and passed around because they provided a benefit to religious organizations. It's very much a case of blaming the victim. And if there's a God who created me, gave me a brain, and wants me to evaluate everything else in the world based on reason and make my decisions, then the same must apply to the doctrines of hell that are absolutely traumatic for some people. Now, I didn't have this issue. When I found my way out, I never really gave hell too much thought. I didn't sit around toiling, ooh, I don't believe anymore, what's going to happen to me now? For me, it was one of the best experiences of my life, and I am fundamentally a better person across the board having done so. I don't ever have to do the love the sinner, hate the sin garbage again. I can love them both, because the concept of sin, or what they want to label as sin, I don't buy into. I don't think you can wound a God, and I don't think that any sort of being who says, no, you can't be who you are, even though you're apparently not hurting anyone, you're hurting my feelings. So what? Even if you were real, I don't care about your feelings. And I don't care about your views on morality. And I don't buy into the notions of punishment and torture. We all know better than that. If you have two kids who are in a restaurant and they're misbehaving, and you take them home, and one of them you sit down and you say, okay, the next time you go to that restaurant, you're going to behave yourself. If you don't, you're going to get some sort of punishment. But if you do, we'll get you a dessert. And you take the other kid and you sit him down and you explain, how would you feel if somebody else were doing this while you were sitting there? If you're sitting there trying to have a conversation, and somebody's acting out at a table next to you and being noisy and interrupting, and instilling empathy and reflection on actions such that they realize that their beliefs have actions, their actions have consequences for themselves and everybody else, but they have to share space, which means there's going to be some level of cooperation. Your limits on swinging your fists into my nose and your limits on acting up in when they start affecting other people's lives. And then you take them both back to the restaurant. Both of those kids behave. Which one's more moral? Which one has a better understanding of morality and ethics? Which one's going to behave when the carrot and the stick that the parents waved around are gone? Religions are inventing the carrot and the stick because they think we just can't behave without them. Hell is the biggest stick. Heaven is the biggest carrot. Fortunately, a lot of us realize we don't need a carrot and stick. Real or fictional. You can do good for the sake of doing good. The idea of punishment, even limited punishment, may be ultimately flawed. It doesn't actually do anything to improve the situation. I'll have to go into the prison system or capital punishment to even begin to discuss that. But teaching people how to interact with others honestly, with compassion and empathy, fixes far more than any punishment I can think of. Hell, if it's true, is horribly immoral. And if it's not true, it might actually be worse. Because the idea is poisoning and punishing people and instilling this guilt cycle that denies who you are fundamentally and makes non-immoral actions immoral. I can't think of anything too much worse than saying you're wrong for being who you are, than saying you're wrong for being who this person made you, and they're going to punish you for being that wrong. Hell, the only extent that I can say it's close to real is the mindset that is inflicted upon people by religions, where some of them are in hell every day of their lives. So I don't mind. Thanks. So I think we're going to take some questions. And by the way, you can ask about anything. You don't have to ask about hell, because we might have completely covered it. Who knows? You can ask about the show, the Patreon project, or the book that I keep talking about that's still not done, just so you know. And just whatever you'd like to ask. But remember, please, questions in the question mark, and they don't include a life story. I'll be happy to have long conversations with people, but I am incapable of giving short answers most of the time. And if there's a lot of questions, then the longer the question is, the worse it is for all of us.
Well, this is not a question, but this is a very short comment, and it has to do with how religion scars people with their fear of hell. So on my right, I did a show almost identical to yours for about 5 or 6 years, the Atheist Forum. One night, I called up in his 70s and related how as a youngster he was an army brat in a variety of fundamentalist churches, and how he still had, even though he'd been an atheist for going on 50, 60 years, he still had nightmares about it. And as he was telling us about it, he started to cry. And every time I think about that man,
Yeah.
Somebody next stand up as followers, people really realize it.
Yeah, when I mentioned that I get this in emails a lot, I'm not kidding. I currently have about 8,000 unread emails, but of the read ones, this one comes up all the time. And when I'm at conventions or debates or events like this, probably about every other one, there's someone who will come up to me in tears asking me, how do I deal with this? How do I cope with this? Because my rational mind knows this, but there's this lingering irrational fear. And the first thing is, it's not your fault. We need to come to grips with this in a lot of other areas too, about what is or isn't somebody's fault. If you are suffering from some form of PTSD, if you have something that triggers you where you're reactive, that's not your fault. That wasn't something that you did that made you bad. It was something that was done to you. And getting people to realize that is one of the first steps that needs to happen, so that even if it still bugs them for the rest of their lives, perhaps we can get to where it doesn't traumatize them. Because the number of people who have just been, I've met who were just absolutely sobbing over what was done to them by religions. And by the way, nothing bad ever happened to me as far as leaving religion. I didn't have anybody die, I wasn't abused by anybody, I didn't have a traumatic experience. I'm an atheist because I wanted to be a preacher. I wanted to be the best Christian I could be. I wanted to fulfill my obligation under 1 Peter 3:15 to be able to give the reason for the faith that was in me. Nothing bad happened. Turns out the best Christian you can be is an atheist. If you read the Bible,
Awesome.
One quick announcement. We go to Corrales on both days, 19 afterwards. So if you'd like to go, it's first come, first served. And if a crowd shows up, we may have to sit at several tables, but I'm sure Matt would be willing to talk to you further there if you get the chance. So.
and also, if anybody needs to leave, don't worry. Like, you can leave and not want to think that's rude. I understand people have other things to do than listen to me all day.
Okay.
But you should.
Yeah, my question is, well, I see that beyond traditional religion, there seems to be some of the same types of problems in our thinking. Sam Harris, when he talks about Muslims, it seems fairly apocalyptic. An environmental example, you got Paul Ehrlich, who writes this string of books, The Population Bomb, The Coming Ice Age. I mean, this guy could find the apocalypse in a jar of mayonnaise. So it seems like there are common things that go wrong with our thinking, and I'm curious if you've broadened it out at all, or if you have any interest in trying to come up with some way that we can identify when we've run off the rails of reason and that we need to be careful of that.
Yeah, so most of what I end up doing focuses primarily on religion, applying my skepticism to religion. I also am a huge advocate for humanism and teaching humanist values to people, teaching people critical thinking. I've been a magician since I was I started when I was 3, but it got more serious when I was 9, 10, 11, 12, something like that. And I'm doing more magic shows as well. But I'm also, I did in St. Louis a week or so ago, what I call magic and skepticism, which was a way of teaching people what skepticism is, what it's not, demonstrating some things that appear to be impossible, just so that they know that there's some doofus like me who can perform things that seem impossible. So the next time you see somebody who's doing something that seems impossible, where they're crediting the supernatural, you might think twice about it and see what similarities there are. I don't tend to get into specifics in different areas of politics, and not that I'm not interested in it, I do on occasion. It's just that I'm self-taught. I have the areas that I'm interested in. And I know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And I'm good at debating religion. And so I do most of the debates on that. I am pretty good at talking about logic, philosophy, skepticism, and magic. I'm not so good in the arenas of politics. I suck with money. But give me money anyway. I'll try to let them take care of it. And so this, religions didn't invent the problem. Religions institutionalized the problems in our thinking. And I think people ask sometimes, well, what do you think the world's going to be like? all these religions in the past have vanished, so you think that the modern religions will vanish too. Yes, I don't know when, I don't know how long, but I tend to think that reason and reality went out. But I think what you'll see is what we're currently seeing is a rise in New Age, pseudoscientific, wooey. The more vague your God claims become, the more unfalsifiable they become, and the more immune to criticism they become. So the people who are saying, well, I believe that God is just everywhere and everything. Okay, cool. I don't know why you put the God label on everything when we already have a perfectly good label. Everything. But until you actually say that this everything God wants you to stop making cakes for gay people, we probably won't have too much of a problem other than I do care what people believe. People say, oh, why should I care what people believe? It doesn't affect me. Yes, it does. What people believe informs their actions. Their actions have consequences for all of us. People vote based on what they believe. So what people believe is important. What all of us believe is important. That's how we act. We don't wait till we have knowledge or certainty or anything else. You act in accordance with your beliefs. Religions didn't start that problem. They just exposed it and institutionalized it. And in some cases, as I saw at the Church of Christ in San Antonio, I don't have any hatred for ignorance. It just means you don't know something. That can be fixed with education. And sometimes people say, it's not ignorance that's the problem, it's stupidity. Well, okay, we get into the intelligence discussion. What I despise is willful ignorance and the celebration and encouragement of willful ignorance. So when somebody says, I don't know anything about this, or thinks they do know, they don't, and they will keep it that way, that's the willful ignorance aspect, and I just don't like that. I don't have a lot of respect for that. But what I saw from the Church of Christ preachers, from the stage, was the encouragement of willful ignorance. One of them got up there and said, hey, look, I don't know anything about the science really, but I have a friend who does, and here's why evolution is wrong. That is the encouragement of willful ignorance. It is misinforming. And I don't know if that answered your question, but it was fun to say.
Well, you have actually answered my question. I have met people who have beliefs that epiphanies, visions, what have you. And as a humanist, I feel like I need to strike a balance between respect and disbelief.
Yeah, so, and here's how I deal with this. Your mileage may vary. By the way, everything I say could be wrong. Figure it out for yourself. I'm just here to tell you what I think. But I'm right. So, when somebody comes to me and says that they were abducted by aliens, or that they had a visitation from a dead relative, or that aliens came and spoke to them, I'm willing to accept that they had some experience that they are trying to relay as accurately as possible. I don't believe that their description of that experience is necessarily accurate. And where they've had an experience that they then attribute to a cause, for example, I prayed and Jesus took my headache away. I believe that they had a headache, I believe that they prayed, I believe that the headache went away. I don't believe that they've demonstrated that Jesus was the cause for the headache going away. And the thing that we have to remember, and this applies to all of us, is that when somebody comes up and tells you they don't agree with you, our natural response is to be offended. Because we tend to cherish the ideas that are ours. They make up who we are. And we tend to view it as rude to tell somebody that you don't believe them. Because that gives them the impression you think they're lying. And so we need to be careful in correcting, saying, I'm not accusing you of lying. I don't believe you're lying. I just don't think you're correct. Or I'm not yet convinced that you're correct. In some cases, I think you're wrong and here's why. But this issue of how you have these conversations with people who relay a personal experience, I don't try, they'll do the, well, how do you explain that? What other explanation is there other than God? Well, that's the argument of ignorance fallacy to start with, but I don't have to have another explanation. Because I can't even investigate your claim other than the fact that you're making it. And if there's a God who's running around giving little revelations to people, why isn't he doing it for all of us? Why is it that Paul is worthy of a Damascus Road experience that fundamentally transforms his life and builds the Christian church, not Jesus, Paul. Why aren't the rest of us worthy of an immensely good experience? And any God who's doing favors like that, I'm going to say it's fundamentally wrong. Even if he existed, it's thuggery. It is the mafia boss example that I've used before. Hey, nice soul there, it'd be a shame if something happened to it. The idea that you need to be subservient and worshipful and respectful and follow the rules of this particular deity just because he says so. When we were kids, we learned that just because I say so is not a good reason for anything. It's the most dissatisfying answer that you could ever get. Well, why? Because I said so. That's what their God's doing. Now, the good thing is, quite a lot of them ignore their holy book. And they have been, Christianity's been dragged kicking and screaming out of the dark ages by secularists, by freethinkers, by people who say, you know what? Your book advocates for slavery and we don't like that. And they're like, yeah, that's a bad idea. Let's see if we can reinterpret these passages so that we can pretend that it was indentured servitude, which is also immoral, but it wasn't. Well, let's see if we can reinterpret this so that it was moral at that time, but now it's not moral, which is nonsense. But they don't, the Bible is every bit as horrible, if not more horrible, than the Quran. Or than pretty much any other. The thing is that most people don't actually believe what the Bible says. They focus on the love one another. And you go to the church, I don't know how many people went to like a modern megachurch Christian service. I went to several of them, because I'll punish myself sometimes. I didn't even recognize the music. There's no hymns like I grew up with. By the way, the Baptist hymnal has 666 hymns. I have one on my shelf, and I took a picture of that. After that, it's just like call and response things, not actual songs. But they were doing secular songs. There was a song by, it was 3 Doors Down, Superman, or something like that. And this dude's up there playing on a guitar and playing it slow, as if it was about Jesus. And I was like, you're just another failed Austin hipster musician, and you found a church who'll let you play what you want and pretend that it's about you. I don't know, that had nothing to do with your question. See how good I am at this? Who's got the mic now? Yes.
I'll stick with the hell theme.
Okay.
It's one of my favorite topics. When I told my parents that I was an atheist, my mother still to this day, although she kind of accepts that I'm going to be in hell now, she cried all the time. So the way I tried to alleviate that was I didn't know about the apocalypse thing that you talked about. I told there's a meme a lot on Facebook and everywhere else about how Christianity created hell and goes from Sheol to the actual southern place where they burned all the bodies. And have you ever incorporated that into your talks? And are you familiar with that?
Oh yes, I actually gave a talk to the ACA. It's available online, and it is just straight on the history of hell, looking at Sheol, Hades, Gehenna, Tartarus, all these things, and I just didn't want to include all of it here. But the thing that you're talking about with your mom crying about you going to hell, I've dealt with that personally, and I know a lot of other people do. Here's what worked for me. Mom believes that there's God, that God has a plan, that God wants you to know He exists, and that He answers prayer. She also knows that she can talk to me until kingdom come, which I like to say her, and tell me her personal experiences, and that's not going to convince me. She also knows I'm a good person, and that if God reveals Himself to me, I will acknowledge it. I might not worship Him, but I would at least no longer be an atheist. Given those things, the best thing she can do is pray for God to reveal Himself according to His plan. And as soon as I did that, that took the responsibility off their shoulders, put it back on God where it belonged, and we were able to develop a new normal in our conversations, where there wasn't this constant, I've failed you as a spiritual leader and you're going to hell and you're taking everybody around. Which, by the way, if that's the case, some of the people who are supposedly in hell are the people I hang out with
Thank you, Matt, for all the wonderful work you've done with the atheist experience. It's endlessly entertaining to have somebody call you up and act as though they know the Bible, and you just destroy their arguments with logic and your more in-depth knowledge. So speaking of your in-depth knowledge, I'm just wondering what your opinion is about the historicity of an actual Jesus Christ. Do you think such a person really existed, or is it just all made up?
Are you guys having Richard Carrier? No, you're just having Silver. Okay. Richard Carrier is going to be in Orlando in March, I think. He's a good friend of mine, and he wrote a book on the historicity of Jesus, and he's in violent disagreement with Bart Ehrman. Bart thinks that there's good reason to think it was a historical Jesus. Carrier does not. He used Bayesian analysis. He wrote a book called Urban History that argues for using Bayes theory to analyze historical claims, and he turned that onto the Jesus claim. I've seen criticisms of Carrier's work. I haven't seen any that show that he's actually wrong on his calculations, but I have concerns that Bayes theory isn't necessarily the best way to go about doing that. In part because I've seen Bayes theory, which a probability analysis, essentially, you take known priors, and it's kind of complicated. It has a place and a use in figuring out what is or isn't the best bet, essentially. It applies to game theory, all kinds of things. To answer your question, I have no idea. I don't have a problem with the idea that there may have been a person that this is based on. I don't have a problem with the idea that there may have been several people this is based on. And I don't have a problem with the idea that this is a fiction. And it doesn't matter to me. Because the mere fact that there's a question about it is already completely damning to the story. Because that means there's a God who went all this loophole work of killing himself, who didn't bother to make sure that this was the single most well-supported claim in history. The fact that there's a doubt. Now, I could even grant you, yes, there was a historical person named Jesus, and then we have to ask, do we have a good record of his words and deeds? No. But I could say, yes, we have a good record of his words and deeds. The Bible is accurate in what he said and did. Okay, is it accurate in its account that he was killed and that there was an empty tomb? Sure, I'll go ahead and grant that one too. So there was a guy named Jesus who said a bunch of things and performed things that people reported as miracles, who they then killed, and then they found an empty tomb. Did he rise bodily to heaven? You know what? I'll even go ahead and grant you that there were people there who witnessed that he rose bodily. Does any of that prove that he was God? No. And it's because we are blocked from examining supernatural causation. We have no mechanism by which we can confirm that the supernatural exists or that it can cause anything. So at best, you get to, here's this mystery for which we don't have an explanation. And it gets even stickier because is there anything that a God could do to actually prove that it exists and is in fact supernatural? Because we, as limited, flawed beings, have no way to tell the difference between a God and some incredibly advanced technology, as Arthur C. Clarke pointed out. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So it may be the case that we're forever blocked from being able to confirm this. And even with James Rand Educational Foundation and others testing for supposedly supernatural paranormal claims, they never get a positive result for this. But even if they did, all they would ever be able to do is say, yes, this person apparently can find water underground. Is it the sticks doing it? Is it some underground water fairy? We don't know what the mechanism is. And so even if you granted all that stuff about Jesus, you wouldn't know the mechanism. What you have is, wow, that's super awesome. When's he going to come back and explain it to us? Because then you end up with the Jesus the magician theory. So I'm not overly concerned because all of those things that I just granted, just to show that we still can't get there, I don't have to grant any of them. As a matter of fact, I shouldn't grant any of them, except possibly that there may have been a real person. And that when I go back and forth on it, it doesn't matter. Yes?
Some atheists experiencing some of the more, should I say, aggressive demeanor in responding to a caller.
There's somebody more aggressive than me? I don't think there's anybody on our show who's actually more aggressive than I am.
But helping the person to think through what he's saying is not going to happen when he's on the defensive. I just want to put that out. On the other hand, I'll also remember one time you explained to a person that he is a better person to believe that God would do this to him forever. When he pointed out his discomfort when he's talking about...
Yeah, that he was better than his God, better than his religion.
Yeah. That's a totally different tactic. It takes a little more... You got to be clever. But that's so much better than just pointing out as if to imply you're an idiot, which is how... I'm sorry, but sometimes that's how...
Yeah, so there's a lot of discussions about the tone, so I'll just address that. On occasions, not only have I implied that someone's an idiot, I've told them they're an idiot. It has happened. I've changed that, and instead of saying you are an idiot or you are a moron, I'll say that was idiotic or that was moronic. Because we're all idiotic and moronic at some point about something. There's a lot of discussions about how best to have a conversation with people. Number one, I'm not necessarily trying to convince the person I'm on the phone with. They are a tool to convince all the other people watching who agree with me. Because we already know that once they've made a public profession and tried to defend it, they're more likely to double down than they are to change their mind. But it also does happen. And sometimes the caller does change their mind. It's never going to happen, I don't think, in the course of a single call. But I've gotten emails from people who said, I used to watch the show, I thought you were an ass, I thought you were rude, and I used to call in and argue with you, and then I stopped calling in, but I kept listening, and I was taking notes to prove you wrong, and now I'm an atheist. There are people believe for different reasons, and they're going to give it up for different reasons, and there are different approaches that are going to be successful. Just the same way that when people give up the idea of Santa Claus, sorry if I ruined that for anybody. Some of them do it because they get curious and investigate. Some of them it just kind of doesn't click anymore. Others get teased on the bus, and that causes them to do one of those other things or give it up because they don't want to be used as a little kid. I'm not an advocate for teasing and ridicule as the first step. But I think there's a place for ridicule. Ridiculous ideas are deserving of ridicule by definition. And we just need to make sure that we're distinguishing between ridiculing an idea and ridiculing a person. And one of the easiest ways to point this out is that I think your idea is absolutely ridiculous. But if I didn't care about you, and I didn't think you were smart enough to figure that out, I definitely wouldn't waste my time trying to explain to you why I think it's ridiculous. People are going to get offended somebody's going to get offended no matter how you say something. Because they're offended merely by the fact that we exist and won't stop saying that we don't agree with it. Our existence already offends some. The fact that we won't shut up is another. And I get this all the time. Why can't you atheists just shut up and let people, lead people to believe whatever they want? Really? I've never gone door to door since I stopped believing. Have you stopped believing in Jesus yet? I can help with that. I don't do that. You're the one that's having buses pick up all the kids in the neighborhood, buy them ice cream, and feed them full of notions of Noah and Jonah and Jesus in hell. I take incoming calls from people who want to have the conversation. I haven't made an outgoing call apart from having this discussion in years. So yeah, it's never easy. There's no one path. We need as many people working as many different ways as possible to convince as many people as possible.
Okay, we're running a little over, so we'll have one more question, and then you can probably badger Matt for a few minutes after the program.
Hello, I'm originally from Chicago. I moved down here to Florida about 6 years ago. I've been a full-time magician for about 15 years. And when we first moved down here, my son, Jack, who's 5 years old, when he went to preschool, I specifically asked the teacher if there's any, prayer or anything like that, and they said no. And we learned that he was being taught how to pray during the lunch there. Me and my wife started.
Pray for Religion Foundation would probably be my first phone call, but even ACLU and other organizations get involved on stuff like this. As far as raising kids, I don't have any. That may change. And I'm always reluctant to dig in on how somebody else raises their kids. Don't worry too much, because I was raised as a fundamentalist and pretty much turned out okay. Eventually. My main advice is spend more time teaching him how to think rather than what to think. Do your best to encourage inquiry, discovery, find out what their interests are and encourage it. And be eager to say not only, I don't know when they ask a question, but I don't know, but let's see if we can find out, and then try to do that. Because then they understand, we don't know everything. Even mom and dad don't know everything. Even dad don't know everything. Even mom and mom don't know everything. Whatever the situation is, they need to learn to question everything, and that needs to be mixed with some adherence to what the parents are saying. And I don't But the second you say, I don't know, but let's see if we can find out, whether that means going to Google, going to a museum, or conducting a science experiment in your garage, don't do it in the house. That's a big problematic. All of those things are good, and I think that sort of interaction spills over to when they're presented with religious ideas, with pseudoscience ideas, with woo ideas, and they'll be inoculated a little bit, and it'll spill over into their education, where they see the value in learning something, rather than sitting there bored with someone talking at them. I think all schools should just use the Socratic method as much as possible to get kids to realize things on their own, rather than in 325 CE, there was that sort of fact infusion. It might be useful for some things, but it doesn't lead to understanding. It just leads to trivia. I'm going to teach you a trivial pursuit, but I don't understand what I'm talking about. And when I do debates, my favorite part of any debate is when there's the cross-examination, where we're asking questions, because the audience gets to see who actually has spent a lot of time thinking about this, who's giving a stock answer that they've heard from a bunch of other people, who paused after the question and considered about how people's minds a little bit. Thank you guys so much. There are a lot of organizations that I work with, and I'm happy to support, specifically with relation to this notion of health and trauma-based stuff. If you don't have a recovery from religion organization in this area, somebody should probably reach out and start one. You guys are probably doing great on community efforts, working with you churches. I generally think those tend to work out well for people. Recovery from religion exists specifically because people coming out of religions, they potentially lose all of their social connections, they potentially lose family, friends, jobs on some occasions, and they don't know where to go or who to talk to. And that can be traumatic to the point where there's a psychiatrist, a friend of ours, who created the term religious trauma center, where she's actually treating patients who are suffering from the trauma that religion inflicted, which was amplified by leaving that religion. And I'm all for, I worked with the atheist community of Austin for years, community being the operative word. Let's build better communities. And then one last note. Anybody know who Tom Flynn is? Sure, he's the vice president of CFI. I am repeatedly calling for Tom Flynn to resign from that position. It'll irritate some people. Tom doesn't like Sunday Assembly, Oasis, these things that get labeled the atheist church. And that's fine, he doesn't have to like them. They're not for me, I don't go unless I'm the speaker. I have other things that I do on the weekend. But in his capacity as vice president, he made a blog entry at CFI where he declared that the people who do that aren't really secular. They're not really secular. And I don't think anybody in a leadership position in the community should be running around dictating that people, just because they like to gather together and have things that Tom isn't interested in, somehow are insufficiently atheist or not secular enough. That's also the no Scotsman fallacy, which he proudly paraded. Now, I'm not lobbying for any of you to get involved in this. This is my personal battle. But I bring it up because, and I don't expect this to be a problem here, I'm so saddened every time I hear somebody say, oh, that Sunday Assembly, that's just atheist church. They just haven't graduated past churchy thinking yet, and they need to go to church. Churches wants to take them back in any way. And anybody who tells anybody in the secular community that they're not secular enough because they're doing it wrong, I'm going to have an issue. But thanks so much, guys.
Thank you very much, Matt. That was very illuminating and incisive, and we really appreciate it. If you want to make a donation, come on down, take the checks, and if you want to go to the Carrabba's on North Bay East 19,